Good evening and welcome to the first ever Infosys Prize Winners Symposium. We're so happy to see so many of you here. It's a very small and focused group that we invited because we're trying out a new idea with the hope that it's going to become established tradition in the years to come. So thank you all. And first of all, thank you all to the winners for being here, the winners of the Infosys Prize. We have among us 5 of you today. Professor Manu Devadevan, the winner of the Infosys Prize in Humanities, couldn't make it. But we'd like this evening to share knowledge and ideas because that's probably the best way of seeding new knowledge and innovative collaboration. And that's exactly what we'd like to do here through the symposium. So we have all six of our jury chairs, I believe, and 3 of our trustees as well. So I'd like to say thank you all for being here to listen to the winners. And also students from across the city, from across some very prestigious universities and research institutes across the city, and heads of departments and institutes. So I think that we don't want to waste too much time in introductions, but rather just have all the winners speak for 15 minutes each to tell us about their work. And we'll have a break of maybe 10 or 15 minutes after they speak so that we can ask questions and really get into the spirit of the evening at that point. The first speaker that we have is Professor Siddhartha Mishra, who is a professor in the Department of Mathematics at ETH Zurich. And I heard you mention in an interview that you live around beaches, but then you went on to study avalanches, and you didn't even really want to do math. So we'd love to hear from you.
Okay.
What changed?
Thank you very much for the introduction and for letting out some secrets here. Yes, so I call myself a computational mathematician. I hope the laser is clearly seen by everyone. I call myself a computational mathematician, and sometimes it's unclear what we do. So let me start with that. So what does a computational mathematician do? So what we do is that we design algorithms to simulate complex systems on computers. So these are the key words here. Algorithms simulate computers. And the systems that we simulate could be from physics or biology or engineering, chemistry. And many times these, when you try to do a quantitative description of these phenomena, so what you end up with are mathematical objects called nonlinear partial differential equations, or PDEs. And these objects are rather complicated. I'm not even going to show you one example here. But to understand them, you cannot simply write down a formula. There are no explicit solution formulas, so that's not possible. Because of that, what we need to do is to, for instance, to predict them or to understand their behavior, we need to use what are called numerical methods. So in a way, think of a PDE as an analog or a continuous object. On the other hand, a numerical method discretizes or digitizes the whole thing. So that's the basic idea. And there are a variety of numerical methods to do this. They have names like finite difference, finite volume, finite element, collocation. By no means am I going to explain that. What I'm going to do instead is I'll try to mention some of these methods by telling you a few stories from my own research. And what I'm going to do is I'll anchor or tag each of these stories around a keyword. And this keyword is what we keep in mind when we design a numerical method. So my first story, it's an eclectic combination of stories, as you'll see. My first story comes from solar physics. And the keyword that I'm going to talk about is stability. Stability of the numerical algorithms that are going to be discussed here. So the object that we study in solar physics, of course, is the sun. So what happens in the sun, and many of you know this, is that a lot of energy is generated by nuclear fusion. In the core of the sun, this energy moves up through radiation and through convection to the outer layers of the sun. So as one would expect, as you go from in here, up here, the temperature, which is here in red, it keeps on falling, just like it does on Earth. And then suddenly, in the photosphere, which is up here, I don't know how well you can see it, it reaches about 5,000 degrees Kelvin. And one would expect it to fall further, but it does not. Then, rather strangely, it rises up to about 10,000 degrees Kelvin in this region called the chromosphere. And then suddenly it rises up to 1,000,000 degrees in the corona. So this is one of the most interesting problems in solar physics, is trying to understand why this heating happens in the outer layers of the sun. And some of the hypotheses that people have is that there are waves which are generated. After all, what's inside the sun is a plasma. It's a lot of hot ionized gas. It interacts with the magnetic field, and these waves are pushed up, and they put some energy up in the outer layers of the sun, and possibly they heat it. One of the ways to test these hypotheses, the best way, of course, is observations. But even to constrain observations, you need to do some theory, or you need to do, and the PDEs that model these are rather nasty objects called the magnetohydrodynamics or MHD equations. This is a big system of 8 equations, so I'm not going to show you what it is. You can't solve it by hand, so you have to solve it on a computer. And the point is, when you try to do that, at least naively, unfortunately, the graphics are not very good here. The resolution of the printer is not very good. So if you do it naively, even with a high resolution method, what you get are instabilities, spurious oscillations. You can't see them, but there are some pimple-like features here. My apologies about this. I didn't know about the projector. But then, so these pimple-like features form. These are instabilities. These are completely artificial, introduced by the numerical method. And we need to somehow take care of them. We need to stabilize the computation. And this is a very involved process for every numerical algorithm. Some years back, we figured out a way to do that, and then these oscillations went away. And once you can do that, you can scale it up. Means I'm trying to compress 5-6 years of work in 1 minute. But if you do that, you scale it up. Okay. Now, somehow it has decided to. Okay. Can you put the next slide, please? Oh, yes. Maybe this was a big file. So what happens is, so once you do that, you put in a lot of solar physics, and this is a simulation from the outer surface of the sun with data that was observed by SOHO, which was a satellite around that time. And then you can see the magnetic fields are from SOHO, and we do the simulations. You see the magnetic fields are forcing the waves up, and when they are weak, the waves go up by themselves. And when you do the energy distribution, you see quite a lot of energy is dumped in the upper chromosphere. And this is consistent with a heating of approximately 10,000 Kelvin. It does not answer coronal heating, but it sheds some light about chromospheric heating. And it does it because we were able to design a stable numerical algorithm. So stability is a key word. But sometimes, next slide, please. Yes. Sometimes stability is not enough. And we have another keyword which comes in here, which is accuracy. And I'll illustrate that from a problem in climate modeling, which is the one of stratocumulus clouds. So next slide, please. Yes. So stratocumulus clouds, so these are the clouds. So this is stratocumulus over the Pacific, and this is when you look at it from the aeroplane window. And this morning when I was flying into Bangalore from the Arabian Sea, I saw kilometers of stratocumulus clouds. So these are a very common cloud type, and they're not rain-bearing. What they do is that they have a very strong role in climate change. So they have very strong climate change feedback. People have done calculations which say that a 15 to 20% increase in stratocumulus coverage is going to offset global warming due to doubling of the CO2 concentration. So if we're really lucky, all the CO2 that we are pumping into the atmosphere increases the stratocumulus cloud coverage, and then we can escape climate change. But I don't bank on it. Nevertheless, you need to simulate these clouds. And when you do that, this is not easy. And here is the reason why. So this is an observation. And when you try to simulate this with a state-of-the-art code, WRF from the US, this is what you get. So this was the observed cloud field. You want to see this. But what you get is everything is dissipated. There is no accuracy here because you have a very subtle interaction between stability and accuracy. If you have too much of stability, if you stabilize your computation too much, then you have no accuracy. You are off by 80% in this particular case. So I looked at this problem with a group from Caltech some years back, and we found how to interact these two factors, and this was our simulation. And you can see that this almost matches this entirely. And because of that, more recent climate codes, like Clima, they use this kind of an algorithm. So here, accuracy was sort of the key word. And the next story that I'm going to tell you is also from geophysics. It's from Tsunami modeling. So this is, as I said, it's going to be an eclectic combination. And I start with this picture. Again, I don't know how well you see it, but this is a place called Lituya Bay in Alaska. You see, it's very rugged terrain, beautiful nondescript bay. And why do we care about it? Because what happened here on the 9th of July 1958 was truly momentous. The big earthquake, about 7.6 on the Richter scale. Because of the earthquake, a part of the mountainside essentially crumbled, collapsed onto the bay, and this set off a tsunami, and not just any tsunami. This tsunami had a wave height of 100 meters. So just imagine, you have a 100-meter high wave, and we know about it because of the damage it did afterwards. You see all the trees here are flattened. The run-up was 525 meters. In fact, this is the most, or at least the highest tsunami wave ever recorded. So how does one even simulate such an extreme event? It turns out this can be done. Next. And this was done by a group in Spain some time back, some of my collaborators in Spain. And you can see that the mountainside collapsed here, set up a tsunami, and this really had a 100-meter, you can't see this, but this is about a 100-meter high wave. But the point is, even though this is a very impressive simulation, it's actually useless. And the reason for this, even though it's a 100-meter wave, the reason for this is all the simulations are PDEs, but they also have many parameters. For instance, here there is a parameter called the Coulomb friction. These parameters have to be measured. You go to the lab, you measure them, and some of these parameters, the measurements are highly uncertain. So uncertain that each time you repeat the experiment, the standard deviation is going to be the same as the mean. So this is a very high noise to signal ratio. And because of that, you can't just, a single simulation does not tell you anything. You have to do what is called uncertainty quantification. So you have to tell what is the uncertainty in a given simulation, and this is very expensive. You'll see in a second how expensive it is. So, but yet we were able to design some, next slide please. Yeah, we were able to design some novel algorithms, something called multi-level Monte Carlo methods, and we are able to calculate not just one single realization of the flow, but the mean over millions of simulations in this particular case, and the variance. Again, the graphics is very poor, but you can see that the mean is about 100 meters, but the variance is about 1 meter or something like that, or standard deviation is about 1 meter. So even though the input uncertainty was very large, the nonlinearity compressed the uncertainty, and the output uncertainty was very small. So this is a very robust simulation in that sense. And next slide. And we have done this for much more complicated objects, such as tsunamis in the Mediterranean. So here's a tsunami generated off the coast of Crete, and then it's sort of from the earthquake generated from the coast of Crete. And you can see how the waves spread and what is the standard deviation. And again, you can see that these are very robust simulations. And this has been operationalized now in the tsunami early warning system in the Mediterranean. So these three stories were sort of the front end of what I do. There were some, at least in my opinion, cool applications. But most of the time of my research group is spent in the back room, in the back engine, where we do the mathematics and the computer science that we like. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. So the first keyword that I anchor myself on is computability, or what we mathematicians call as convergence. So all these numerical simulations, these are discrete objects. So just think of your weather forecast for Bangalore. I think the resolution here is 5 kilometers by 5 kilometers. That's the resolution that you get, or maybe 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. But then you refine it to 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. You expect that your simulations would converge. Next slide, please. And this is what you would expect. This is a simpler problem, but you would expect something like this, that as you refine, as you have more degrees of freedom, you get a better and better answer. But in reality, most of the systems that appear in the real world, they are nonlinear, they are chaotic, and as a consequence, you see just from the eye that as you refine, as you have more and more resolution, there's no convergence. And this is a serious issue, because what is exactly being computed then? Next slide, please. So most of the work in my research group in the last 5 years has focused on this question. We have developed a concept called statistical solutions. So some beautiful mathematics comes in here. And we've understood that what converges are not individual realizations, but rather statistics. So the mean very nicely converges, the variance converges, and even joint probability distribution, some very complex statistical objects, they converge. So that's the object that really converges. Next slide, please. But so this was the issue of convergence, where some beautiful mathematics comes in, but there's a caveat to that. And the caveat is the computational cost. And here is where the computer science comes in, where we need high performance computing platforms. Next slide. And just to give you an example of the cost that is required, so I have access to a computer called PISDAINT. It's in southern Switzerland. It's actually 6th in the top 500 now. It's the most powerful supercomputer in Europe. Even on this computer, one of my codes which I've developed for about 10 years, a single simulation, 1024 cubed, it's 10 billion degrees of freedom simulation, would require 3,000 node hours on this machine. What does that mean? So let's cost it. Remember that one simulation is useless, we have to do ensembles. Many realizations of that. So if you do 1,000 samples, and if you cost it, the cost is 1.7 million US dollars for a single simulation, 1.7 million US dollars. That's impossible, right? Even in a rich country like Switzerland. So one of my PhD students, Shetil Liye, we realized that what happens is most of the computing power of these big machines nowadays comes from GPUs, graphics processors. These old codes were written with CPUs, so we had to change everything. And just by doing that in an efficient manner, we got a speed up of 10 to 30. And because of this speed up, 1.7 million becomes about $50,000, you can do some simulations. And for instance, here's the same thing in 3D. So you have a sample, very complex flow field, a jet flow, does not converge in any way, very complex features are formed, but the mean and the variance are boring, but computable. And this is what you want. But as I said, still, $50,000 for a single simulation like that is expensive, right? And in a country like India, we certainly can't afford doing that. We don't have access to that. So at the moment, scientific computing is actually the privilege of a few. But what I at least envision is that it should be for many. Many people should have access to it. But this is difficult. But there is a game changer that's coming in, which is machine learning, artificial intelligence. And let me give you an example. Again, the graphics came out very badly. So this is supposed to be an aerofoil. There was a high resolution mesh around it, just a cross section of a wing. This is the flow field around it. The point is that even for this two-dimensional simulation, it took 7 hours on a cluster, not on PISDAINT, but on a cluster. And we just are interested in the lift and the drag because we want to optimize the shape of this aerofoil. And this is expensive, right? But machine learning, particularly with neural networks, for instance, by replacing this with a deep neural network, we were able to, with some training samples, 128 training samples, we were able to train this network in just 10 minutes, which is remarkably less. And the evaluation time of the network is a microsecond to 10 microseconds. So this is 9 orders of magnitude. And we're still accurate. We are about 1% for the lift and 2% for the drag. But this is not straightforward, plain vanilla machine learning from computer science. We simply don't have the data that a computer scientist has, so we had to do quite a few tricks. So hopefully in the future, more and more machine learning tools will be available and be employed more and more in the context of computing, and we would be able to really have big scientific simulations on a computer or hopefully one day on a mobile phone. So that's sort of for the future. So I try to share with you what we do with a few examples, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Maybe you can, I don't know if you want to stay there, but I think that we'd love to open up the floor for a conversation if there are any questions or just comments, observations. Yes, please.
Yes.
I give you a mic.
Hi. So I'm clearly not very knowledgeable about your area, but I want to kind of figure out where do you see and what do you hope to accomplish? I know you said the mobile phone is where you'd like all of this to go, but where do you see the next generation of what you hope or your field hopes to accomplish or push the boundaries towards?
Well, in terms of the mathematics, there is a lot of interesting mathematics that I did not even dare mention here in this general audience. But in terms of computing, I think the game changers will be from artificial intelligence. As I said today, you saw the numbers for yourself, right? There is no way, only a few groups in the world, like mine, have access to supercomputers. We have access to the technology to do this. But most people don't have access to it, right? So we have to change that. And the algorithms that have been used now were developed, we keep on iterating and improving them, but they were sort of, the foundations were laid in the 50s and the 60s. I think now in the next 5 years, there will be a paradigm shift. Because also computers are changing, right? We have GPUs now, we will have TPUs next, computers are changing. So there will be a sea change, or at least I hope there will be a sea change. I see that in 10 years, hopefully, we will be able to do uncertainty quantification, we'll be able to do inverse problems, we'll be able to do very complex scientific problems on cheaper systems. That would be the goal. Yes.
What are the constraints in the next 5 years? The constraint is going to be the creation of the algorithm. The constraint is going to be computational capacity. And also, for the algorithm, can we train the machine to fine-tune an algorithm so the creation of the algorithm can become easier and better and finer, like you did in some of the examples?
That's a very, I think there are two questions. And the first question was about what is the constraint. Technology is less of a constraint, right? Because if, of course, I can wait for Moore's law to ramp up processor speeds, but memory is anyway not catching up, power consumption is a problem, and so on. So I think the constraint is in the mind, right? We need new algorithms, we need new thinking. So that's, at least from my perspective, the main constraint. And second, can machine learning do numerical analysis and not me? Means I think that's difficult. At the moment, already it can be done. You know, there are frameworks like AutoML and so on, which one can adopt. And if you lay out the idea, then instead of hiring a graduate student, maybe I can use AutoML, or I can use some things like that, some automatic machine learning algorithms to be able to fine tune. But still, someone has to think what the algorithm is going to be, right? And I don't want to take out all the graduate students. This is some of my colleagues, they say, okay, who cares about graduate students? I do. So, but I think this is possible. But still, the human element is very important here. A machine is not going to invent these algorithms, right? It will fine tune them, for sure.
Hi.
Yes.
I was wondering, when you went to the machine learning model, was it informed by any physics in it?
Yes, absolutely. So the machine learning model is informed by physics. There's a lot of mathematics. The point about this, I didn't have the time, but the point about this is that we have very little data. Each data point is like a simulation which takes 7 hours, right? And if I have 10,000 data points, then I can as well do that 10,000 data points. So you have very little data. You can have 100 data points.
I guess what is counterintuitive here is that normally when we think of machine learning, we think we have lots and lots of data available, right?
This is exactly the challenge in scientific computing. The challenge in scientific computing is to learn maps or functions or classes of complicated ones, like the ones that I showed you, with not too much data. Because this is the challenge. How you do that? For instance, there are many tricks that I have used here. Instead of randomly picking my training points, I used what are called snowball sequences. Instead of, I used some variance reduction techniques to reduce the variance. There's a whole bunch of tricks and techniques that are used. So you can't just use plain vanilla computer science tricks here. This is an important point. In my experience, you never do that. You always get the wrong answer if you for the right reasons, maybe. No, but you see, this is I think Professor Sarawagi is also going to talk about machine learning. There's a big difference when you, for instance, you're recognizing faces, or you're making YouTube recommendations, than when you're predicting the lift and the drag of a fluid flow across an aircraft, right? So there's a lot more physical constraints here. And by no means is my machine learning, all that of course I use the algorithms, like basic optimization algorithms for machine learning, I don't know, some ADAM or some supervised learning algorithm, but there is still a lot of open questions, of course. Means I don't understand everything, but I understand quite a few things. So if I don't consider machine learning to be a complete black box, not in this context, at least.
So you gave one example of a tsunami, but in the other problems that you picked up, what are the physical reasons that lead to rapid changes or discontinuities, which then you have to use numerical algorithms to model?
Non-linearities, right? Non-linearities. So non-linearities, you start with something smooth, then yes, yes, non-linearities. So non-linearities govern the whole thing. So there are pressure changes. The pressure changes changes the magnetic field. The changes the magnetic field heat up the gas. That changes the magnetic field. Non-linear feedbacks. So non-linearities. This is the issue somehow.
You mentioned some chaos in your output of your initial simulations. But isn't that chaos real? It's actually present in nature?
Yes, it is
So
in nature.
why should I care about the mean or trying to get better mean?
But you care about it because you want to predict, right? In a chaotic system, it's no point predicting. You need to know with what probability what probability the temperature is. The system is chaotic, but its statistics are not. Hopefully, and we have not been able to prove that, but yes. So this is the whole point, because the individual simulation is of no consequence somehow. Okay.
Thank you so much, Professor Mishra.